Welcome to another episode of Tolkien with Friends. Today we are talking about the chapter A Warm Welcome and about 30-ish minutes of the Desolation of Smaug, from the time Bard shows up until most of the dwarves leave Lake Town, which we are going to talk about more in a second. But first, we would like to extend the warmest of welcomes to our good friend Emily, who we are so excited to have joined us again for season 2. Welcome back, Emily.
I'm happy to be back.
We always have such a fun time
We
together,
do.
so it was obviously you
I
had to come
did.
back for season 2. But if you missed her in season 2, if you don't know Emily, let people know where they can follow you, and how they can see more of your beautiful face.
Oh, well, you can find me at Silmer Emily on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram mainly. Also, pretty much anywhere else. The handle was wide open, so I grabbed it everywhere, like Twitch, Reddit,
Smart.
like any other kind of like platform. I was like, man, might as well. So
You never know.
never
You
know. It's
never
like, I want to
know.
start Twitch streaming one day. Who knows? So yeah, that is where you can find me. But mainly
That was good. That was
TikTok.
very
Yeah.
smart of you. Yeah.
Every time I type it
Yeah.
in, I'm like, fingers crossed, and it's never taken.
I'm so excited to have you back. And as you know, we're talking about The Hobbit, and not just Hobbit the book, but also Peter Jackson's
The infamous
iteration.
at this point, I think.
So, we've talked a little bit about how we came to The Hobbit, and we've gotten a bunch of stories. We've all come to it in different ways and at different points in our lives. But so we wanted to hear a little bit from you about how both the book and the movies were introduced to you and your experience with them.
So I got a box set of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies when I was in high school from my mom, because she's the one who like grew up reading Tolkien, kind of like ripped her books to shreds. And so I think it was around the time the movies were coming out.
Is your mom also a beaver?
Yeah, she just nods on them. um, so
Sorry.
she like got me into the world, and I don't know. I would say I'm ashamed, but I'm really not ashamed to admit that I picked up The Hobbit and
Never.
immediately put it back down. I was just like, this is boring. I don't care.
How old were you?
I was probably freshman in high school when I got the books,
yeah.
and that was probably when I first attempted to read them, and then again started Fellowship of the Ring. And if you do know who I am, you know that I read the Lord of the Rings books and kind of did like each book of the series. I did like a TikTok video recap about, and I famously, at least New Beta knows this, that I hated Fellowship because I was like, this is so boring. Why is nothing happening soon enough? Like, why is Frodo taking a whole chapter to sell furniture? This is so boring. So I feel like I felt similarly about The Hobbit. I don't know why I never tried to pick them back up again, but then around that same time, the movies came out, and I was too young to see the Lord of the Rings trilogy in theaters, but it was perfect timing for The Hobbit. So I did go see all of those in theaters. And I really haven't tried to read the book since. So I will admit that I started reading in preparation for this. I started reading the book, and then I didn't get far enough, and so I was like, I'm just gonna skip ahead. So I skipped ahead, and I just read this chapter. So
that's okay.
That is my background.
That's totally
That
cool.
is where I am with The Hobbit. So
that's so interesting. I feel like Chris had when he was on From the Soul Hero, I feel like he also picked up The Hobbit towards after he had already done Silm and everything. And I do think that like I read it when I was like 10 or 11, so it was like perfect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The age it was
and
meant
then
to
it
be
kind of like
before.
Yes. So like, and it's kind of become like my comfort book now. Like one time I was like I was feeling so anxious. I like canceled all my plans, and I was like, I need something, and I just grabbed The Hobbit and started reading it. I was just like, I was like in a hole in my
See, I want to feel that way. I hope I get there one day, because I feel like my experience with Tolkien's world is so deeply entrenched in the movies that it is, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that back. Like, I know a lot of people love the movies, but read the books first, and I just,
Yeah.
that was not my experience, and so it's harder for me to read the books without the like visual medium
Yeah. I
there
mean,
helping
that's
me.
part of what kind of triggered season one, you know,
Mm-hmm.
was that like I read them and then immediately watched them. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then I mean, I read all of them and then the first movie
Yeah.
came out. And so it was like my experiences with them has been so impacted by the movies that I was kind of just like, what is in it and what isn't? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like there, like I vaguely could remember, or
Yeah.
you know, when you're reading it, you're like, oh wow, I didn't
That's how
remember
I
that
felt
part, or
about Harry
you know,
Potter. When I read Harry Potter when the books came out when
mm-hmm,
I was little, and then, watched the
mm-hmm,
movies, and I've spent, the rest of my life just rewatching the movies. And so it was like a couple years ago, I was like, you know what? I should go back and read the books. And like there was so much stuff that I had forgotten where I was like, oh, that all happened.
mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I've come to understand how 90% of people feel and like have experienced the world of Tolkien that I missed out on because I was too young.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And then you were too busy reading the Silmarillion,
Exactly. I don't know why.
so
I just was a weirdo.
my favorite kind of weirdo.
Yeah. I feel like I
But
found more
yeah,
people. Like through TikTok, I have found more people
yeah.
that did that. Like I made a video being like, this is super unpopular, but because I always get comments about when I say like I read the Silmarillion first and I read it
Mm-hmm.
multiple times before I even deigned to pick up the Fellowship of the Ring or the Hobbit. People are like, "What?"
Mm-hmm.
I've read the trilogy 20 times and I can't get in the Silmarillion, and I'm just like, I don't know. So I think there's more. I found more people out there like that where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. Like,
No, absolutely
yeah,
not. You, yeah, I think it's just there's so many
yeah,
factors at play with how like a book
yeah.
resonates with you, right? It's like the time in your life, how old you were, like
Hmm.
how the book even like fell into your hands in
Exactly.
the first
I
place,
find
you
Tolkien's
know?
writing style to be my biggest hurdle. That was something I
That's
struggled with
interesting.
in The Lord of the Rings, where I just, the way he tells the story is in like, he's, plot points are being told to the reader through characters telling it to another character,
Oh, yeah.
really got on my nerves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just didn't like that.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
that's something I'm very hesitant to say because I know a lot of people.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like those moments where it was like happening at the same time we were somewhere else with different
Uh huh.
characters, and so they were like, "Oh yeah, by the way,
Yeah.
this also
Yeah.
happened." And that was, I think, one of the strong points of the movies
Hmm.
is that he was able to kind of bring those timelines together and like
Yeah.
show rather than tell a
Exactly.
lot of the time.
Yeah. I think I just prefer a different method of storytelling. I like the stories. I like the world. Like I like everything like
Hmm.
that, but just not a huge fan of the medium that it's told in, or like the way that it's told, I
Mm.
guess.
I think that just every time I read them, I there's like a different part that like
Mm.
stands out to
Mhm.
me. You know what I mean? Like there have been times where like I mean I think we said this before because you joined us for Tom Bombadil, and there have been times where I will literally just skip to Bree
Yeah, yeah, like, I don't
and
want to
start
read that
reading
part.
from there. I was like, I really just need to see my boy. I need my Strider. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there are other times where like I haven't really read the poems, and then other points where I'm like, you know what, I'm reading the poems this time,
Yeah.
you know, and like so, I
Oh
don't know,
yeah,
it
I'm a
just
total like
it
I'm a
changes.
total poem skipper, and then I see people talk about it and they're
Hmm.
like, if you skip the songs, you're lazy. And I'm like, ooh, ooh.
Yeah, they're like, "You're missing out on so
Yeah,
much
I mean,
stuff."
I
It's
don't
like,
I
"Oh
don't think
gosh,
it's
skim.
I
I'm kind of
definitely
like a
skipped
skim.
over."
I'm a skim reader anyway. I just kind of skim the poems and songs. Sorry.
yeah. Well, we are gonna talk about a song today
Mhm.
because it comes into the movie, and I was like, wait a
Yeah.
second. So, uh, let's get into it.
Mhm.
So when we last left Bilbo and our company of dwarves, in both book and movie. They had escaped from Thranduil's fortress, whatever you want to call it. His house doesn't have a name, and it's still bothering me. And like every house has, like, you know, places like that
Everything
always have a
significant has a
name,
name.
or he just lives in this like cavernous situation in the woods, but whatever. Thranduil's house. And they're making their way to the Long Lake via barrel. Of course, in the movie, they are also being chased by orcs, which we may or may not talk about. It really doesn't resonate that much with me. I do not care about them.
Just, you know,
personally,
had to
the
add
orcs, take them or leave them.
They had to add the tension.
Yeah, everything. It's just always everything is so like serious all the time in the Hobbit movie. So orcs always. We pick up in the extended edition of the movie about an hour and 13 minutes in when Bard shows up. And the dwarves have exited their barrels because, as we know, they weren't packed in there in the movie. They just were, you know, they were having a whole thing with their barrels and just kind of floating along and bobbing around. Personally, I do like that we get to see more Bard in the movie, especially this section. He takes up a lot more space, because I didn't realize it until today, but he doesn't actually show up in the book until chapter 14, and we're on
I was
chapter
like
10.
reading this chapter. I mean, obviously I've seen the movies like twice. Just reading this for the first time, I was like, where the heck is Bard? Like, what's going on? Like, where's Bard?
No Bard.
It's
I mean,
a very
really,
different chapter from the movie.
yeah, this chapter is pretty quick and to the point
It
in
is.
comparison to like the things that happened in the movie. You know, like they show up, I mean, a section is spent on unpacking the dwarves and talking about how like shitty they feel, which I get it. They should. That was awful.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really only Thorin, Keely and Feely and Bilbo that are able to unpack everybody. And they're also the ones that just show up to the guards people and they're like, yo,
we're here.
I'm here. Take me to the master. And they're like, he's busy. And they're like, don't care. We're hungry and need shit. So that's pretty much the chapter.
Right. There's
you know,
no
but
like sneaking in and
none of that. None of that. We're not sneaky people. You know what I mean? It's a different vibe, but we've also got orcs, so I get it. And you know, Bard in the movie agrees to help the dwarves sneak into Lake Town. And I do like, I know that we've talked about this before, that the movies aren't really about Bilbo, but Bilbo is my favorite part of the story. So I just wanted to take a second to point out that the chapter opens with a bit of exposition and it takes some time to remind the reader of just how lucky Bilbo has been. I mean, we've had this before, but in this instance, Bilbo, when Bilbo sees the Lonely Mountain in the distance, he's by himself at that point. Like, the dwarves are still in their barrels before they pull over and kind of get out. I know in the movie we do get to pause and see the Lonely Mountain for like half a beat. But when Bilbo sees it, Tolkien takes a second to point out how, unbeknownst to him, using the Forest River as their exit for Mirkwood was, in fact, the only safe route to that northern part of Mirkwood. And that, you know, many changes had happened in that part of the world, like swamps had opened up and like earthquakes had happened. And the old forest road they had been on became a doubtful and little used end. So not super descriptive, but it didn't sound like there was going to be an easy way for them to exit the forest if they had continued on that road. I mean, obviously nobody wants to get captured and stuffed in a barrel, but turns out that was
the only way to do it.
They were getting out of there. Which is just like, you know what I mean? Like, it's there's points of it where, you know, there's obviously, I mean, we see this more in Fellowship and like Lord of the Rings, of like other forces moving things in the world, and I feel like there's a little touch of that with Bilbo and his luck here. And this is a point we also get a peek into Gandalf's thoughts, which I always like. So he lets the reader know that Gandalf had recently learned of the issues with the road that he had sent them on, and it gave him great anxiety. And I was like, Gandalf,
Yep.
relatable. He's just like us. And it goes on to say that Gandalf was finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and was getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. And that really made me laugh because I know that, you know, I like to talk about the added stuff from the appendices, but I also just love that Tolkien explicitly was like, I'm not talking about it, and you can't make me. Like, I'm not going to tell you what Gandalf was up to.
I'm going to mention it
Right.
just to tease you, but I'm not going to go into it at all.
I'm not going to, like, be explicit in any kind of way, and obviously, like, Peter was like, nope, we're going to talk about it, which... I just thought that was cute. It does not come into this tale. Like, don't ask me. I'm not gonna tell you. And we do, but we, you know, us being who we are, we know that from the timeline that this is the point where Gandalf was confronting Sauron and Dol Guldur with the White Council. In the movies, we know we haven't quite got there yet. However, in the last scene with Gandalf and Radagast, he does express a desire to return to Thorin and Co., which feels like a reference to this moment of, like,
he's worried
he
about
being
them.
away but wanting to get back. Now, we know in the movie that we skip Bilbo having a cold and the dwarves, you know, being in those barrels like we were saying, but as I was watching, I realized that while Thorin doesn't declare who he is to the Master of Lake Town until, like, the end of this section, and the dwarves, you know, definitely don't sneak into town, at least not to the extent they do in the movies. They use this time to learn more about Bard and his family, and to kind of show the plight of the people of Lake Town under the rule of the Master. And, you know, it's definitely different. Like, why is the lake covered in ice, for one? We know it's autumn. I don't know. I don't. It's fine, but I don't really get it.
Spooky vibes.
Yeah,
Spooky vibes.
I guess so.
It's like, oh, if they're miserable, they must be cold. Like, they want to show the misery of the people, so there have to be not only poor and destitute and hungry, but they're also cold.
I thought that was an interesting choice to make them very poor, the town under in Lake Town, and very, you know, very sad, which I guess the cold helps. So, like, you know,
being a Canadian, I can tell you that the cold does make you sad.
Okay, good, fair.
That is true.
I mean, is it always cold there? Do they just have, like, a shorter summer? I would love to
maybe
know.
They
like,
just
what
are experiencing, like, early winter. Like, maybe they had a really early freeze that year.
Could be.
Never know. It's the end of autumn,
that
so like awful. Maybe they just had an early freeze.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's possible. What we're going with it. So Bard fills. I don't even know what he actually does. I mean, he has them get back in the barrels, and then he has some people fill the barrels with fish to hide the dwarves, which also. I mean, I guess because they didn't get stuffed in their barrels properly, we were gonna do it some way. So that
they needed the misery of being trapped in the barrels to be illustrated, but with fish all covering them.
But with fish.
And then also, I feel like the climbing through the toilet scene also.
Yeah,
that
more of the misery.
That was very
it was.
They're just putting them through.
But I feel like there needed to be a trade-off of their suffering and discomfort, I guess, because the girls.
They were not supposed to have a good time in Lake Town. So with the fish, they're almost found out when Alfred, who I refer to as our Walmart version of Wormtongue.
Yes, very, very much so.
He's got the, you know, the pale dark hair, kind of creepy. Maybe not quite as eloquent as Wormtongue, and a massive eyebrow. Which
he's.
I don't know what it means, but
he's a looking dude.
He's a looker. He's a looker. So he almost has him dumped, declaring the fish illegal, but at this point, Bard stops him by saying how people need the food and they will basically riot if they find out about how wasteful the master has been. And then later we see the master eating whatever. Why
Why?
is it bollocks? We'll never know.
Why, when there's fish available? Is it a delicacy? Like,
I kind of think they're trying to make a point that he's eating fancier
Yeah, like
than
he's
everyone
hoarding
else,
all of the
but
good
I
stuff.
don't think balls will ever
the good
be
parts?
fancier. Personally,
Yeah.
I low-key think that they sneak in 2 dick jokes with the master. Like, they have him eating balls, and then they also later he says poppycock, but he says poppy, long pause, and then cock. So I'm like, I just think the humor in this movie ain't right. It ain't hitting.
Yeah.
But sure. All that to say that they're using all these scenes to kind of show this town ain't doing so hot. The master's kind of corrupt. He's like counting his money and being really selfish. And while I do think he is not a great guy and selfish, I would say that it's more exaggerated in the
Oh yeah.
movies.
Mhm.
In the book it refers to Lake Town as a busy wooden town. It's still like over the lake like that, but that it still throve on the trade that came up the great river from the south and was carted past the falls to their town. But in great days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats on the waters, and some were filled with gold and some with warriors and armor, and there had been wars and great deeds which were now only a legend. And I'm sure that, like, while they're not doing as well as they used to be, but they're definitely not like
destitute, like it's
yeah.
seen in the movie.
Yeah, forsaken kind of
Right.
village. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And another point is, it's like, so when in the books, and Thorin does declare himself to the master, and they come upon him feasting with some of the wood elves and other people from town. Thorin explains who he is, and the master is skeptical of his claim. And he does. It is true that he doesn't want to start any beef with Thranduil, and which is something that Bard relays in the movie. But I didn't get the impression that this guy is just like nasty in the way that he is in the movie. It says that the master did not think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and tolls to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position. And so it just made me think, like, I know that in the movies they imply, like, Alfred makes a thing about, oh, there's been talk of an election, like, as if they're gonna vote him out. So if he is an elected position, and based on this little note about what he concerns himself with, it kind of sounds like he's like a city manager type of job, like where he's keeping track of spending and like making sure that the town is doing decently well. So which Tolkien kind of confirms that he is doing his job. If he's not like the greatest of dudes, he's not like the worst, So I just thought that was an interesting change. I don't think it like totally throws anything off from like the storytelling, but I did think it was an interesting choice to make the town like a little bit shittier. It kind of just like there just can't be Peter really has a trouble with finding any kind of joy in these movies. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like danger, problem, over and over again. And I'm like, can we have like a little bit of a break?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Which I feel like, I don't know if, I mean, I'm saying this with absolutely no proof, but I do feel like that was probably not all Peter. I feel like there was probably a lot of like executive kind of like Hollywood pressure to make the movies more tense and have more problems and have more at stake, I guess. Because if there's like this destitute town and they're on the run from orcs, they're being chased, and there's like they're upping the stakes for the movie to make it more cinematic, which I do
Yeah, I
understand,
guess
and I
I'm
do
just
feel like it
tired.
makes sense that somebody, whether it was Peter Jackson completely or not, that sounds like a choice that somebody would make, in
Mm-hmm.
sacrificing like fealty to the story.
Yeah, I just think that that's like in Lord of the Rings, we do have more of these like downtime, like more levity in
Yeah.
between problems. Like even after Helm's Deep, we go to Edoras and we have a
Mhm.
party. Like that's not in the
Mhm.
book. You know what I mean? Like so
Yeah.
I don't know. Let them have a good time for a
Yeah.
second. I don't
Yeah,
know.
cuz they like in the book they stay there for like 2 weeks just like resting and
That, that's like our go-to
yeah,
time to stay
fortnight as
somewhere.
always.
We did that. We did that at
Yeah,
Fortnite.
it's
Oh wait,
always a
we did that in
fortnight.
Rivendell. We're doing it again
Yeah.
here.
They like spend a week like fattening up and getting warm and
Yeah, being celebrated
yeah.
and having a warm welcome as the
Right.
chapter as the chapter
Exactly.
says. Yeah. And then the movie was so different. I was
Huh.
like, are we doing
Yeah,
the same thing here, guys?
I know.
No.
We they really add a bulk to it before we even get to that warm welcome, which is really it's interesting because like I get that the movie isn't able to like explain that much about Lake Town in the way that the book is. Like they're not going to give us a history lesson. I get
Mhm.
it. And they have like the bard versus master bit where you do kind of get a little bit of that.
Mhm.
And by the time the dwarves do get caught anyway in the movie and Thorin does end up telling the master who he is, the movie have also used bard and the townspeople to introduce something
Mhm.
else about the history of the town, which they call a prophecy
Mhm.
regarding the return of Durin's folk to Erebor.
Yeah.
In the book, these are more like legends and songs that have been passed down about the king under the mountain returning and bringing wealth back to the area again. Sending gold down the river to Lake Town.
Mhm.
Um, but they position it as a not great thing in the movie. So we have Bard. He suddenly has this realization, and
Mhm.
he goes to find this tapestry. While we're also seeing townspeople being like, "Oh, like I saw these
Mhm.
dwarves," like, "Oh, the prophecy," and and Bard remembers some of this song, in which it is book accurate at first, and then I heard the second verse and I was like, wait a second, how did you change that? So first he says the first verse, which is the king beneath the mountain, the king of carven stone, the land of silver fountains shall come into his own. And then they skip to the last verse. However, they change it. So it in the movie it goes like, and the bell shall ring in gladness at the mountain king's return, but all shall fail in sadness, and the lake will shine and burn. So they're making it like the king will come back
Mm.
and Smog pops out, right? But in the
Mm.
verse actually reads, the streams will run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn, all sorrow fail and sadness at the mountain king's return. So this is talking about how sorrow is
Mhm.
ending. Things
They
are
like swapped
happy.
the two
Everyone's
lines
got.
pretty much.
They're, so it's not so much. They made it so it's not about everyone reaping the rewards of the Mountain King's return, uh, which is
Mhm.
what makes everybody want to give them a warm welcome in the book, but that there's going to be
Yeah.
problems, and that's not wrong.
Mhm.
I mean, there definitely are issues with
Right.
returning to the mountain, but I did just think that was funny that it was like, again, a little bit darker, a little bit sadder than
Right.
how it is in
But
the
I do
book.
think it makes sense that
um
Bard, like considering, I mean, we don't know this yet in the
yeah.
book, but because Bard is there in the movie, and we find out in this time that he's the descendant of this ancestor that tried and
Mm-hmm.
failed to kill Smaug the first time, it makes sense that he's like, okay, yeah, they come back, but then what happens? Like, yeah, it's good they come
Yeah.
back, but there's a dragon in there. And what do you think he's gonna do when they try and fail to take back the mountain? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we are
Yeah, I
going
do
to
think it makes sense
die.
coming from Bard, because he is constantly in the book portrayed as grim. Like that's how
Yeah.
they
Mhm.
describe him a lot of the time. So if they are going to go this route, like it better be Bard.
Mhm.
because I think he deserves more time. I
Yeah.
think he's an interesting character, and I do think it was interesting that they used Bard. They switched it up a little bit, and then they also made it so that, like, it is true that the master
Doesn't.
gives them a warm welcome kind of against his will, but basically, like, everybody just gets so excited that he just goes with the flow and is like,
Yeah.
okay, like, we'll kind of go with it. But in the movie, it was very much like, oh, people have been rallying behind Bard based on what Alfred was
Right.
saying earlier, so I'm going to use this moment to take the people's excitement and
Right.
use it for me, and then they'll be disliking him a
Right.
little
Yeah,
bit
because
more,
he
because
in the
he
book he
is.
doesn't like him. Like they all when he saves them and they're all like, "Woo, King Bard." He's like, "Whoa, he's the king. He's the Dale. Like this is Lake Town. This is different. He's not. He has no claim here. Like he's
That's
not your leader.
different.
Like he's not elected. Like what's going on?" So.
So it's kind of like taking some of those vibes and then just using them in a different way,
Yeah.
which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. I just, when he said the words, I was like, wait a second, those are really similar.
And not.
You almost had me. You almost
Landon
got
was paying
me.
attention.
Yeah.
I was like, shine and burn. Yeah, that sounds right. I was like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean everything is sad? This was a happy
Yeah.
poem. They were singing it.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about the orcs and stuff, but I haven't even really touched on some of the additions that they've made. That was pretty much what was in the chapter. Like, obviously the chasing and stuff was added, which of course they were gonna
Yeah.
do. But we also have some scenes with Thranduil, Legolas, and Tauriel. And as we discussed last time, these parts are totally created for the movie. But I did think it was kind of interesting. I mean, we love to see Lee Pace. So they are interrogating the orc that they captured from the chase. And they are basically, Thranduil is just like, what is the deal? Like, why do you care about these dwarves? And the orc says some pretty ominous things. And I mean, is it just me? But do you think they were trying to imply that Thranduil, after that conversation, kind of puts two and two together and is also thinking that Sauron wants to use Smaug? I know this is something we've talked about that is on Gandalf's mind, but with him implying about war and fire, and it does seem to alarm Thranduil, but in a way that he just kind of battens down the hatches, like, nobody leaves, we're
No,
increasing
I
the
think he
watch.
figures it out. I think, or not figures it out, but I think he like starts to suspect something bigger going on.
And they're really juxtaposing Thranduil and Tauriel together, because she is, he's very much like, I'm only concerned with this chunk. I don't care about any other parts. And Tauriel is very much like, this is going to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
And so she goes after these orcs. I mean, she doesn't do it until she hears that Keely was hit with an arrow. But when she talks to Legolas about it, she's very much like, there are, this isn't going to stop with just, and it's like, and also, when do we let people just like take our prisoners and, do whatever they want in our land? Like, they shouldn't have even been allowed through there. So she has a good point. But she's thinking about Keely. We know it.
Yes. That's what I think inspires her to do something. Like, I think previously she would have been like, oh, because I think Legolas kind of says that to her, where he's like, my father's, taking care of you and kind of preferred you over others, and this is how you treat him, kind of thing. Like, Legolas is also kind of like, where did this come from? Why all of a sudden are you kind of going against his orders and kind of going out and being a free agent?
It's a great point. I mean, yeah, I do like, I like it when Tauriel has these conversations. I think the Keely stuff is a little overkill. I know we haven't seen it a lot yet.
Yeah, it's coming.
I know it's coming. And that's kind of why I stopped the movie where I did. Because I'm like, I know hurt. And I just also think it's funny that it's like a Morgul arrow.
Yeah,
Like
like a
we just
Morgul
throw
ship.
around
Here we
Morgul.
go
Like
again with the Morgul
Yeah.
weapons, yeah.
I'm like, what is Sauron getting him shipped from Minas Morgul over to Dol Guldur? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like it's just
And why some random orc in that hunting party had one.
Yeah.
yeah. Like
know.
what about them is special, because those aren't like a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
It's it was specifically a Witch King weapon before, and now they're kind of just using it as code for like super evil, definitely gonna hurt ya.
I think they
You know
just
what I
kind of
mean?
like dip it in poison. Like it's a regular arrow that's just like dipped in goo that makes it poisonous or
I
something.
know.
That's how I always like
Yeah.
interpreted it. Like I didn't think it was like a magical arrow that like the magical dragon arrow. I was like, it's probably just like a evil.
Yeah, but by calling it a
Yeah,
Morgul
I
arrow,
don't
I
know
mean
what
they're
the point of that
implying
is.
that it's like they're implying that it's like a Witch King
Right.
adjacent weapon.
I
And
had
I'm like,
not thought of that.
I'm pretty sure it's, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, yeah. There's like a special kind of evil, and I just
It's a
don't
little
think
plot
that orcs
holy.
just get
Yeah.
that. Little
It's
bit.
a little plot holy.
Little bit. I'm like, just quit throwing it around. Just say it's poisoned. That's totally
Yeah.
fair. Faramir got hit with a poisoned arrow. Just have it be like that. It wasn't. Not everything has to be from Minas Morgul. I'm like, I don't even think we remember what that means.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's like law. It's like a name brand of something that has begun to mean like the Kleenex.
Kleenex. Yeah.
Or they just started using it to mean just like generic
It's just
bad.
slang
Kind of
at this
poison.
point. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
tissue. It's a facial tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a Morgul
Yeah.
weapon. It's
Like
it hurt. It goes
yeah.
owie.
Like Band-Aid.
You know? This is where we start getting to the points where you're like kind of undermining stuff that you did
Yeah.
previously. Like it's less of a big deal.
Right.
Like, it's a Morgul. It's we have
Yes.
tons of those.
I mean, this is like what happens when the prequel comes after the original. I mean, same with Star Wars. Like prequels are after the original stuff. Like when you make things swapped and kind of out of order, you can run into these issues.
I know this would have been probably terrible financially, but like how cool would it have been? Because you know how they shot all 3 Lord of the Rings at the same time. How cool would it have been if they just like
also done the
Hobbit
Hobbit?
in
Yeah,
there?
that'd have been cool.
I don't know.
I wonder if anybody ever talked about that. If that was somebody was like, no, you can't do that.
Well, at one point, Peter was trying to sell studios on the idea of doing The Hobbit, but it didn't work out. But then the whole purchasing of like the Weinstein brothers got Lord of the Rings, and they really wanted Peter to. It was this whole story, which is also in that one book by Ian Nathan about the making of Middle Earth. But he was trying to push for The Hobbit, and then they realized that nobody was biting, and they were kind of sad because they had like started investing money in the script and everything. But I'm like, just it would have been cool if we had like, I mean, hindsight is 2020, right? Like they had no idea. They were really taking a gamble on even doing the 3 at the same time.
I do wonder,
but if we could go back in time,
I know. Well, I also wonder like if I feel like, I mean, again, I'm saying this with zero facts to back this up, but I do also feel like the reason that we got the Hobbit movies that we got, and they suffered from this whole like everything has to be stretched out and extended, is because the Lord of the Rings movies were so successful and made so much money and were so critically acclaimed. And I think that like, again, like Hollywood executive greed was just like, it trumped the integrity of the story, because they were like, oh, if we stretch this out, we can make more money. And I can't help but think if The Hobbit had been made, I don't know, before or around the same time as the Lord of the Rings movies, that wouldn't have been the case, because they wouldn't have been anticipating as large of a success and like a return because of the success of the previous movies. Like I'm like, if they had made The Hobbit first, I think it would have been I think we wouldn't have had all this extra mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, I think it would have been. I mean, it definitely makes you think like they were trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like they were like, I'm going to do as much of what Lord of the Rings did in The Hobbit,
Yeah.
which I don't truly believe would have all come from Peter.
No, it
And I
has
know
to
that like
be.
production timelines were issues, which is why we got a lot of things that were
Mm-hmm.
CG rather than real. But I think that ultimately it kind of became like a fundamental misunderstanding of what made Lord of the Rings the success that it
Mm-hmm.
was. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's like the accuracy to the original material. I'm saying that like as far as the way you consume a
Mm.
movie, you know what I mean? It was just a lot all at
Mm-hmm.
once. And Lord of the Rings did have this ability to have these really big moments that aren't necessarily in
Yep.
the books, but then also cut back and
Mm-hmm.
like have these softer moments, which I think we all love
Right.
so
And I think
much.
the changes made in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, at least in my opinion, I know there's plenty of people who love the books and disagree, but I completely agree with all of the changes that Peter Jackson made to those movies. Like I think every single one of them makes sense for a movie format. I completely understand why he took things out or changed things that he did. But with this is I don't agree with as much, and I think it's because of the greed aspect of it, that some executives decided that they needed to be longer, and so instead of changing things to make it more cinematic and make more sense and make the story more impactful, I think that
Mm.
was not considered as much as it was just make them longer, make more stuff happen.
Yeah, and I think that they could have gotten away with a lot of goofy shit. I think that you know what I mean? Like, if you wanted it to be this sequel to the Lord of the Rings that you gave us and you wanted it to be
Hmm.
darker, I think you could have done that, but you should have pared back a
Mm.
lot, you know? But if you wanted it to be like Bilbo's story, then we should have focused more on Martin
Mm.
Freeman, but we don't.
Right.
It's very like dwarves, orcs. It becomes a
Hmm.
lot of dwarves and orcs over Bilbo. And if you wanted it to just be, I don't know, it doesn't have as like much of a
Yeah,
focus.
considering it's called
That's what I was
The
trying to say.
Hobbit, he's
Yeah,
kind of a side
I
character.
almost think they would have benefited from changing the name.
Mm.
You know, like not giving that expectation that this is.
Yeah.
It's not the adaptation that you thought Lord of the Rings was. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? They called it Lord of the Rings, and they pretty much stuck to what is
Yeah.
in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Hobbit,
I feel like the Hobbit movies are
it's
more about what the subtitles are. Like
yeah,
Unexpected Journey, Desolation of
sort of.
Smaug, Battle of the Five Armies. Like I feel like they leaned more into the subtitles and less into the Hobbit title.
I mean, I don't really have a ton of thoughts about Tauriel, Legolas, or the orc bit. I think
Yeah,
that
I mean it's a continuation
it's
of what they have set up, with this whole orc problem and
yeah.
Thranduil.
But honestly, Tauriel hasn't been that bad so far. I feel like she gets,
No.
you know, Evangeline Lilly gets a lot of shit for it. I mean, I obviously and
Mhm.
truly, I say this every time. I do not remember what happens next. I mean, I vaguely
Mm.
remember
Mm.
like her healing him with
Yeah.
the wound or
Yeah.
whatever, but like as far as like after that, I don't remember a lot of
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
But I love Bard. I think Luke Evans does a good job. I think it's cute to see him with his
Yes,
kids.
more they added some
Um,
more women, um minor characters at
mhm.
least, but I mean it does also, I feel like, cuz a part of me is like, okay, why does Bart help them and then speak out against them when they're trying to talk to the
Mhm.
master? I was like, why bother helping them if you're just going to try and stop them? But then I think the addition
Yeah.
of like his kids kind of colors that
Mhm.
differently, because you're like, okay, not only is he just like, worried about this legacy that he has as, the
Yeah.
descendant.
Because at first it's like he doesn't really think too much about who they are. I mean, he's swayed by the money, right? Like they've
Yeah.
really honed. They like destitute.
Hmm.
No one
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
cash,
Yeah.
so they spend all their money for
Mhm.
that, and then so he has that as a motivation, which obviously
Mhm.
like Balin is very much like, you've got bairns, you know, you got
Mhm.
kids, and he definitely does.
Push
But
that
then
angle.
I think at that the point, yeah, that he realizes who they are, then it's like, oh,
Yeah, like
like
this is
if they wake up
trouble.
that dragon, we are really really
Yep.
screwed, you know. And obviously I'm sure he does carry some kind of, I mean, they also make it out like it was his ancestors'
Mhm.
fault that the dragon didn't get killed, and I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, all right. Personally, if I'm gonna be like grumpy, I do kind of hate that they'd have this whole thing about how he got half of the scale off. He just needed one more
Yeah.
shot. And then I'm like, oh, but that was also Bilbo's thing. Like, he found out that there was a scale missing.
Yeah.
But I'm always gonna be salty. But every time they take something away from Bilbo,
Yeah.
it hurts me.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
So we stop the movie, you know, right here when Bilbo, Thorin, and most of the elves have left Lake Town
Mhm.
on the boat, and Alfred is kind of patting the master on the back about how he handled the dwarf bard situation, and, you know, is obviously getting some popularity out of
Right.
it. This pretty much lines up with where the chapter ends. I mean, obviously all the dwarves got on the boat
Yeah.
before in the book, but you know, we're gonna see more about that next
Mhm.
time. I really didn't want to worry about it this time.
Yes.
I was like, I don't need any more of these CG orcs, okay? I don't
Mhm.
need it today. So we are going to, but we are going to get to Erebor next time. We're going to be on the doorstep
Yep.
is the next
Mhm.
chapter, which I'm excited about. And I also did like this note that Tolkien threw in there on the last page about how everyone's
Mhm.
pretty much happy except
Yep.
Bilbo, because he's
Poor Bilbo.
he's the only one experiencing that anxiety about the dragon
Yep.
part of their plan, which they have yet to figure out.
Right.
And you know, I think Bilbo also has been getting the vibes like he's having to step up a lot more, and they're like, I was, you know, like he's like, I have no clue how to
Yeah.
deal with the dragon. That like I way outside of my
Mhm.
scope, you know. Um,
I feel like he finally is getting
so
like recognition. Like they really start to be nice to him in this chapter, praise
mm-hmm.
him for his good idea, and he gets some of his like comforts back while they're resting. And so I feel like in his like Bilbo-ish nature is like, can we just now we just stay here, and then everything else is hard. So they're all like, woohoo, take back the mountain. And he's like, oh, we had it so good in Lake Town. Like now we have to go do the hard bit.
Now it's like it's becoming real,
They can
you
see it.
know.
Like the
Like
mountain's right
he's
there.
uh-huh. That's
Mm.
stressful.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, you know, because like before, I mean, we have never been this close, and we've always had something else to
Mm,
worry about, and now it's kind of like, all right.
this is it.
So we'll see what happens next
Mm.
time. Is there anything else that I forgot?
I don't think so. I think the only note that I made was how much I like the
Oh,
theme music in
I was
Lake
gonna
Town.
say that I love
Mm.
Lake Town's theme.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. They have like a different really different vibe and design from any of like the places we've seen, and particularly like the human settlements
Yeah.
that we've been to. They really gave it its own kind of look and feel, which I think makes sense. Like they're not Numenorian, you know what I mean? They don't have that ancestry. They're not Bree really,
Mm-mm.
where it's kind of like a gaggle of all different kinds of people. They're kind of their own thing. Maybe more adjacent to the Rohirrim in like relation, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like the middlemen of Middle Earth.
Right.
But they've got their own vibe and their own style, which I thought was kind of
Yeah.
nice.
No, I do love the theme music for Lake Town. I feel like just the music in these movies in general are what makes them so like I feel like they'd be good,
Mm-hmm.
but not quite as good if the music wasn't so impactful.
I mean, obviously we know Howard Shore really
Mhm.
killed it for Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings, and then he's able to bring back a lot of
Mm.
those themes and do other things with them. And I think this is definitely a nice example of like a new thing that we haven't quite seen
Yeah.
before.
It
So
gives it its own feel.
absolutely makes you feel like you're in a place that's lived in and
Mhm.
real. I know. I think that's something we talked about with Lord of the Rings, like really having that sense of place whenever you go somewhere new. In the story, the music is also a really big part of giving the audience that sense of like, oh, like we've never been here before, or we have been here before. You know what I mean? Like kind of directing how you're not just your emotions, but like your sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, for being
Thanks
here.
for having me.
It is always so fun. Callie, thank you for always being my ride or die with the podcast. You know, through all the ups and all the downs that is The Hobbit. Because there have been times. I think next time I'll be pulling my hair out a little bit. I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I'm worried about
That's
it.
going to be a hard section to match up book to movie, I think, because it gets a little off track with the whole Keeley situation. So.
Oh yeah, it's just we're gonna be like, meanwhile in Langtown, while the dwarves are doing something else.
Right.
And I'm also kind of like, I don't remember like how he gets back to the group. Like, I know somebody listening to this is like, I can tell you.
I remember because I just saw the movie, but I won't.
Did you just watch? Did you watch all of it?
I just went ahead and finished the end of it. I was like, we're close to the end.
Yeah.
I also saw them recently. Like my husband hadn't seen them yet, so I want to say like a couple months ago, I watched them for the first time since I saw them in theaters. So
nice. I did a rewatch
during
I did a rewatch during like the lockdown portion of the pandemic when we weren't really doing anything.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't like reach for rewatching them like I do the Lord of the Rings movies. So I was like, oh, you haven't seen them? Sure, let's watch them.
Yeah. I feel like these are the kind of movies that you just put on to just have in the background and you're like doing something else.
Totally.
And I'm also hoping that we get to see Gandalf soon, since we did get to see him last time. I'm like, where are you going now? Maybe we'll get some White Council. Yeah. Maybe we'll get some Saruman again.
I mean, in the movies, I think that's what happens. I'm not sure if it's in this section or it might be a little bit after, but like he does confront the necromancer and
sweet.
Everybody shows up in his defense.
Everybody shows up? Aw.
Yeah, everybody.
Party at Dol Guldur.
They all save Gandalf. Screw the mountain quest. Screw the mountain quest. Everybody goes.
You rewatch it. Does Radagast show up?
Yeah, Radagast and Gandalf go to Dol Guldur, and Gandalf is like, "All right, I'm going in. Go get Galadriel. Go tell Galadriel and the White Council." Right. And Radagast is like, "Wait, Gandalf, this is a trap." And Gandalf's like, "Oh, it's most definitely a trap," and he goes in anyway. And, like the White Orc is there, and they ambush him and everything. And that's when he like sees Sauron, and then Galadriel and Elrond show up in their fancy armor, and there's like that moment where you're like, are they trying to insinuate that Galadriel and Gandalf are okay?
Oh my gosh, we talked about that. They were holding hands the last time we saw them together, and also we were just talking about how like Gandalf asked Radagast to go with him to that tomb, but Radagast did not get an invite to when Saruman was there at Rivendell, and I was like,
rude. Yeah,
rude.
Yeah.
Rude. I love Radagast.
I do. I bird poop in his hair and all. I know that Nuba hates that part, but I'll just say that just to get under his skin. But
I think it's very on brand.
Pro bird poo hair. He's just
on a bumper sticker somewhere.
He's just a quirky little dude. He's got his bird balloon in his hat.
Those birds are his
I mean they got cloacas. Like, they can't help it. It's just it is what it is. You keep the birds close to you, you get pooed on.
Yeah, and that's friendship.
Real friends let their friends poo on them. If you don't like your pants, sorry, I can't.
This is sounding like the after hours version of the podcast.
We haven't had it. We've just been drinking water, you guys. Like,
just shows how much he truly cares about his little animal friends. He doesn't make them go away for anything.
Right. And he's not gonna like force him to wear a diaper. That'd be weird.
Bird diapers.
Hey, and I knew of a guy who he had rescued chickens from like a slaughter situation, and they lived in his New York City
They had
apartment,
no
and they wore
diapers.
diapers.
Wow.
They wore
Wow.
diapers. We'll all be googling chickens in diapers, birds in diapers. But Radagast would never do that to his bird
No.
friends. They lived wild and free,
Yes.
and as they
Yeah.
should, as they should.
So at least you have that to look forward to. Next chapter. And all
Right.
the
Yay!
Kiwi and Tauriel
Yeah,
romance.
I.
Gotta love it.
Not the.
Mm.
You know that's the only reason I watch
Oh
these
yeah.
movies.
Totally for the love triangle. I
Legolas
know.
and your CG'd eyes or whatever they
Yeah,
did to
this is
you.
I always
You're
the
so
best
blue.
thing like
My
what I
God.
hear people talk about these movies is how Luke Evans looks more like Orlando Bloom than Orlando Bloom does.
Yes.
Like when you say if you told an absolute stranger who knew nothing about these movies
Mm-hmm.
and you said, "Hey, Orlando Bloom is in this movie." You would say he was Bard. You would not say he was Legolas.
Mm-hmm.
And this
I
is
know he's
nothing
giving
against
Will
it's
Turner.
nothing against Orlando Bloom aging. Like I don't think that's why he looks
Mm-hmm.
different. He looks different because they used different contacts, and I don't understand why they did that. His eyes is just
Unnecessary.
wrong. He had blue eyes in the other movies. They just weren't as like stare into your
Yeah.
soul piercing. Like they just looked more natural and
Right.
just
Wrong. Yeah. I'm like continuity at least. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like just replicate. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. It's
It is.
distracting. It's
It is.
rough. Join us next time to be distracted by Legolas's
Creepy eyes.
ungodly eyes.
Like that Miley Cyrus meme.
Oh, and
Like people with
yes.
blue eyes be like.
So we'll have more of that next time, or who knows how I'm feeling. Maybe I'll just try to avoid it altogether. I don't know. Probably we'll talk about it. But in the meantime, be sure to join us on Instagram and Twitter. Tolkien with Friends or Tolkien Friends on Twitter, but mostly Instagram, honestly. And you can also join us on Patreon for extra stuff like handwritten notes, early releases, and lots more. And you can join there are no tiers. You can join for as little as $1 a month, and all of your support will go directly to the podcast so we can keep doing this for you. So with all of that, thanks again to both of my lovely ladies here with me today, and we will see you all very soon.